Hello and welcome, Warhammer fans. This is Poohead189, and today I have some special news for my viewers. Today I will begin my first video on my series involving the time of Woes, which will also include 2 episodes in the fall and reclamation of Carrack 8 Peaks. If you're subscribed to me, you know I am a huge fan of the dwarves, so it was a lot of fun making these videos. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. To start off, the war between the dwarves and the High Elves ended in a dwarfish victory, when High King Gotrek Starbreaker slew the Phoenix King Calidor II at the 14th Siege of Toralessi in the year 1628 BS, or before Sigmar. I know it's kind of an odd little abbreviation, but still. However, the smaller quarrels and minor battles as the dwarves slowly kicked the elves off the old world didn't halt until the year 1500 BS, conveniently. And I say conveniently because it was around this year that the great Slann mage priest of the Lizardmen, who happened to be my other favorite faction, there's an irony there, decided that the World's Edge Mountains were not shaped in the correct way, and with their powerful magics, they rent the rock and mountains asunder to realign the landscape as they thought was best for their interpretation of the plan of their ancient gods, the Old Ones. Tired after a war that had lasted 4 centuries, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dwarf lives, the Dawi didn't even have time to lick their wounds before their holds were plunged into turmoil. Great fissures appeared, tearing at the very rock of their homes. Volcanoes rose and mountains fell as the landscape changed, and so began the time of Woes. As dwarf holds fell from the movement of the mountains, the enemies of the Dawi struck from above and beneath, for as they had fought their war of vengeance, the Skaven and Greenskins had grown exponentially in number, as had the trolls in the mountains, and with the great calamity of the tectonic plates shifting, even fouler, darker things stirred from within the deep. The dwarfs had no choice but to pick up the axe and shield once more and go into a second war, one as bloody as the last, one for their very survival. In 1499 BS, a year after the cataclysm began, Carrack Varn, the hold that guards over Blackfire Pass and one of the 2 holds that watches over Blackwater Lake, falls. A massive invasion of Skaven and Greenskins erupt forth and catch the unsuspecting dwarfs by surprise. Many of the dwarfs had not even returned from the wider Old World to their homes before the eruptions occurred, so a lot of the soldiers were still out in the Old World. The fall of this Carrack is the herald of the time of Woes. A year later, Ekrund is overrun by the orcs, for it has the unfortunate luck of being located within the very heart of the Badlands, the land infested with greenskins. In the same year, Mad Dog Pass, the road north of Barak Var and one of the most well-trodden roads between the Badlands and the Border Princes, is overrun by night goblins, though granted, it is not something that could necessarily be occupied as most settlements could be. However, they plague the road for years to come. As the dwarfs made it back home to reinforce their respective holds, the Dawi managed to slow their enemies' advance, though it did not halt. The Dawi were now too few in number to sufficiently defend their huge realm, and the enemies they fought against outnumbered them 100 to 1, even with the armies having returned. The next losses recorded in the Book of Grudges occurred 41 years later, in 1457 BS, when a large and mineral-rich mine in Gunbad was taken by night goblins. The dwarfs began to lose ground, though the enemies of the Dawi paid every inch in blood. Endless streams of enemies and awakened dragons tore at the realm of the dwarfs. Such was the number of their foes that the dwarfs could not even find any organization within the ranks of their enemies. Instead, they seemed to be more like a sea of flesh than an army to face. It was in 1387 BS when the hordes of greenskins struck close to the very heart of the dwarfish empire, and the Silver Road War began. Named after the trade road that led from the Darklands to various dwarf holds, ending at Karazakarak itself, the capital of the Dawi. The war began at Mount Silverspear, the very easternmost hold of the Silver Road. Truth be told, Mount Silverspear was more of a fortified mine than a Karak, and it's a testament to dwarf warcraft that they held the mine for 20 years. The colony was ruled over by Clan Gunnison of the royal line of King Gun, who traced their lineage back to Morgrim, the ancestor god of engineers and the son of Grimnir. However, after a 20-year siege, the hordes of the orc war boss Urk Grimfang broke the dwarf defenses and overran the mountain. Mount Silverspear was then dubbed Mount Grimfang, and since then the dwarfs of Clan Gunson, now homeless, split into 3 separate entities. The first group took up with Karaza Karak and even now defend the High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer to this day. The second group attempted to retake Mount Silverspear and slew many orcs before they were in turn killed. And a third contingent now make a living as traveling veteran warriors and orc slayers. Within 5 years of Mount Silverspear's fall, various mines and outposts in the eastern sections of the World Edge Mountains are abandoned, as the dwarfs need to reinforce holds and outposts closer to home. For nearly 100 years hence, the dwarfs gather their strength and hold off what attacks they can, grimly setting their feet and raising their shields. The loss of Mount Silverspear, a hold so close to their very capital, set a fury within the heart of the stout folk. If this be the time of woes, they would face it with Grimnir's wrath. It was in 1250, before Sigmar, that Thunder Mountain, otherwise known as Carreg Dran in the Dawi tongue, erupts. Huge numbers of orcs and goblins migrate northwards and towards Karaza Karak. During the vast migration, the small towns of Valhorn and Buderikhorn are destroyed. In light of such attacks, and with the fury of 10,000 grudges, High King Morgrim Blackbeard gathers his forces and unleashes the fury of the dwarfs. What occurs next are what we know as the Troll Wars, a dwarfish crusade where Morgrim and his throng spearheads into the waves of orcs, goblins, and trolls that had begun moving northwards, scattering them with stout shields and wedged formations and hacking apart any straggling or fleeing orcs in the process. Once the campaign is over, the dwarfs harvest the skin, blood, and body parts of the vast amount of dead trolls. For they use trolls for many things. Ragarin is the Khazalid word for the very common, sturdy, and fashionable troll-hide cloak. The High King Morgrim wins the first major victory of the severely reduced dwarfs since the time of woes began, and Morgrim Blackbeard slaughters nearly every orc and goblin above and below ground between Karaza Karak and Mad Dog Pass. Meanwhile, one of Morgrim's generals, Logazar Brightaz, leads a throng and temporarily recaptures Mount Gunbad from the Greenskins, though they are forced to retreat once more Greenskins arrive to reinforce. In the south, dwarf morale is high and Morgrim Blackbeard assaults Mount Silverspear, but is unfortunately repelled by a large force of trolls and migrating ogres from the Mountains of Morn, moving into the dwarfish territory. Though the dwarfs did not lose the battle, the High King saw fit to retreat and reinforce Karaza Karak against such a force. Time proved it to be a wise move, as the trolls and ogres formed into a horde that filled the very valleys of the Silver Road and assaulted Karaza Karak itself. This scholar has no record of how long the assault lasted, but by the end of the siege, the enemy was scattered, and the bodies of innumerable trolls were piled into what seemed a mountain of flesh, and lit on fire as a warning to all who dared attack the Dalwi at their capital. Thanks to Morgrim Blackbeard's example, the following 300 years held small victory after small victory for the Dalwi, slowly regaining a foothold in their former provinces and repairing bits of the underway. It truly goes to show the sheer stubborn determination of the stout folk, for no other race in the Warhammer world could fight 2 world wars above and below ground, lose city after city, and will still be ready, nay unwavering and resolved to retake what is rightfully theirs. To a manling, the time of woes seems hard to fathom or understand. As many know, the average orc is naturally far stronger and more ferocious than your average man of the Empire. 1,000,000 strong, a horde of orcs could ravage untold miles of the old world. However, pound for pound, a dwarf can match an orc for brute strength, and with superior weapons and discipline, and a grim, fatalistic stoicism, for every dwarf that fell, over a dozen orcs died. Yet such was their numbers and their monstrous allies, though I use the term allies loosely as there was plenty of infighting. The dwarfs seemed to be on the verge of extinction, and were hard-pressed even after the untold slaughter of their enemies during and after the Troll Wars. During these years of crusades and reclamations, a venerable runesmith or rune lord by the name of Adrian Redmane led a force of dwarfs in a daring attack and manages to scour Carreg Varn of the Skaven menace, killing thousands of the creatures and sending the rest scurrying for their holes. The forges are then reopened once more, and vast quantities of Gromril is mined and forged for the next 50 years. However, in the year 1136 BS, Adrian Redmane and a number of dwarfs are killed at the shores of Blackwater Lake, presumably during a trading mission between Karakvarn and Zufbar. The runesmith does not go easily, however, and he's responsible for slaying 36 massive orcs before he receives a mortal wound. With his last breath, he casts his fabled weapon, the Hammer of Ages, into the waters of Blackwater Lake to keep it out of Greenskin hands. Unfortunately, it was the signal of a massive Greenskin attack, and within 10 years, the dwarfs are forced to flee Karakvarn once more. At this point, much of the dwarf offensive slows, and the borders solidify. It isn't until 975 BS that the next High King, Skorri Morgrimsson, leads a very large army of dwarfs to Karak Ungor in the north, otherwise known as Red Eye Mountain, located within the mountains east of Kislev. It was lost near the beginning of the Goblin Wars, which is another name for the Time of Woes, and was infested with night goblins and other orc kin. The dwarfs spearheaded into the southern valley and it cleared it out of Grobby, and then captured the southern gate. However, they were ambushed and driven back by the night goblins, for the greenskins had a low cunning and the dwarfs had underestimated them. A thane named Strakkard Jarlki was given the task of holding the captured gate as the dwarf army split and a contingent of it went underground to infiltrate the hold. Unfortunately, the goblins were not unaware of their movements, and the night goblins of the Twisted Claw tribe swarmed out of the gate and battered the dwarves who attempted to hold their ground, and they were driven away from the gate. The High King heard of their troubles and ordered Thane Jarlki to hold his position until reinforcements arrived, but the upstart Thane, brave though he be, attempted to recapture the gate, but he died trying to breach the night goblin lines. The dwarfs below met with resistance in many hard, unsteady tunnels. The only dwarfs to successfully infiltrate the lower halls were Fergil, the High King's young and only son, Gudrun, Skorri's closest friend, and a handful of other brave dwarfs. However, they were eventually discovered and ambushed by a band of night goblins and a giant troll, and were never heard of again. Those dwarfs above and those that came from underground met at the southern valley, but their losses had been too great despite the many dead night goblins. They were forced to return home to Karaz-a-Karak, and High King Skorri Morgrimsson died shortly thereafter. Some say it was from the wound he received on the battlefield, but many others believe it was a broken heart from losing his only son and heir. During the next 225 years, the night goblin ranks in the World's Edge Mountains swelled, even with the infighting and the constant wars with the Skaven. The hold of Karak Israel, later to be known as Karak Azgul, perhaps the wealthiest of the dwarf holds, Karak Israel meaning City of Jewels in Khazalid, was attacked by night goblins, though the horde was repelled by the Dawi within the mountain fortress. Impatient and running out of room and space within the mountains, the night goblins instead regrouped and attacked Karak Azul, also known as Iron Peak. The night goblins knew the upper portion of Karak Azul occupies an entire plateau overlooking the valley and road below. The spires of iron over stone walls gives the impression it's built atop a mountain, and so an attack from below would be needed to take this hold. Initially, the night goblins, fighting fiercely, gained footholds in the western halls and the lower depths. But just as with the dwarfs in Karakvarn with the death of Kadrin Redmane, the night goblins are driven out after 10 years of fighting in the lower tunnels. Karak Azul, from its inception to the current timeline, remains the only dwarf hold within the southern World's Edge Mountains to remain steadfast and within dwarf hands, as it is located in the Badlands. Its name, Iron Peak, is apt for the staunch bravery of its defenders. In 720 before Sigmar, the first isolated dragon attack, isolated meaning that many dragons were awoken and attacked the countryside, devouring dwarfs, orcs, and trolls when the mountains had shifted in 1500 BS, occurs by a dragon named Skaladrek, known to be of a light red or reddish-pink color with its scales. It incinerates and destroys several mines near the Slayer Keep of Karak-Kadrin, though it is unknown by this scholar on whether the hold held such a title at the time. Skaladrek the Incarnadine is also known for being the sire of Grog the Terrible, who attacks and takes over Karak Israel until it is slain by Skalf Dragonslayer in 1032. Thus ends part 1 of the Time of Woes. There are many bloody battles ahead, so stay tuned. My next videos in the series will be on the fall and reclamation of Karak 8 Peaks. Thank you so much for watching, and if it honors you, like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Alright, thanks guys. Have a great day.